So, hi everybody, Steve Falconet here. Welcome to Tea Time, I guess. We'll have some fun editing this, but nevertheless, yeah. Today, for the Circle of Brilliance, I decided that it would be great fun for us to invite WayneBuckhanan to present to us some of the things he's been doing during COVID. And so, Wayne, I'll kind of pass it on to you. You can give whatever setup you want. Where did this
Sounds
all
good.
fit in? Tell them why you're doing this, etc.
Yeah, and I automatically did the whole slide deck, so we get a full-on presentation with title and everything. So there you go. So yeah, T and I were chatting, and it came up that some of the things going on with remote that I mean, I've had no issue with remote personally because I just dove in and did things, but that some of the resources that I was relying on in the background, I'm like, oh yeah, not just productive attention, but I have some other models that I rely heavily on. So we'll go ahead and dig through, and I mean, the why should be fairly obvious, but also why am I talking about it? We know the why, 2020, right? When March 2020 rolled around, I was a university professor, and spring break hit us, and it broke. Right? They said, "Don't come back," and I decided not to come back for a year and a half. So I was remote that whole time, and I got the best student feedback ever during that year when I just assumed I'm not going in and let's design everything the way that I've been pushing for years to be remote, be friendly for the people who were, I mean, I had students who were in Malaysia and still participating. So it was it was one of those moments of, I'm just going to keep doing my thing. And I just leaned more and more heavily into the remote side of things. I'd been remote. I mean, 99% of my support network is either in the household or remote. I mean, I've not really been impacted heavily by the lockdowns, et cetera, because I have that. But it also means that I've developed a lot of skills that are specifically focused for how do I do that? So coming into the summer in 2021, I ended up pausing all of my academic aspects and have been more focused on the business side for a period. And so I joined a blockchain gaming startup, The Uplift, and we did some fun stuff and sold $3 million worth of NFTs last year. And Bold Molders project, which is primarily been using the marketing side of things and developing the curriculum for a partner project. But they're 100% remote, global. I've never physically met anyone on either of those teams. I've never been in the same physical space as them. So the somewhere in there, another partner and I bought a commercial space here in Southwest Michigan, and the idea almost immediately went from, we're having event space and offices, which is the most local thing ever, to how do we also make it remote friendly so that when we do events, that we can have that hybrid online offline. So all of this is to say that I've leaned heavily into the remote side of things. It isn't just me, and it isn't going away. So I've been digging into the stats. I won't share them. You can go look. But a significant number of people are saying, you know what? I don't want to go back to being in the office. And there's quite a few employers who are leaning in as well. And I've seen this suggestion that 16% of businesses globally are 100% remote now.
Mhm.
So 1 in 6 just blows my mind. So what have I been doing that has been working on the remote side of things? I have, in the vein of T's merging of brilliance and T's second merging of brilliance, I've brought together a number of different models that work really well for me and are the core of almost everything I do. I keep coming back to these 4 models over and over and over again. So, what are they? Well, the first one is neurolinguistic programming. NLP, there are so many different framings for what NLP is, and so many different opinions and arguments over it. I tend to, especially in this context, just lean into it as an advanced communications model. So you'll never see this diagram anywhere else besides me, but that's my summary of NLP. We'll dig in a little in a minute. Next up is productive tension. Most of you are familiar with that. And um, even to the degree of I lean into productive tension heavily. Yes, the change grid happens also, but just the productive tension layer has so much that keeps showing up over and over again and is so applicable even remote. Third is the Octalysis framework, nominally a gamification network model, but is really for me a model of human motivation and engagement. And so we'll talk a little bit about gamification and what I do and don't consider gamification and yeah, all that fun stuff. And then the fourth model is kind of two layers that are merged together in one model of experiential learning theory and the format instructional design layer that merges with that. So let's dig a little deeper into these and talk about what they are, the pieces that I see happening, and then we'll really dig into how does this apply into our human development business and especially the remote aspect. And you guys play along. If there are questions, please.
Yeah, by all means, right now I've clicked on everyone's allowed to talk. So if you have any questions or comments to add, feel free to do that. This is this is what these kinds of calls are all about.
So the NLP side of things, I took the idea of all the different pieces that go into neurolinguistic programming, and I've been an NLP trainer since 2006. And I said, okay, what are the big picture pieces that people really care about when it comes to doing the NLP side of things? And so this is where this diagram comes from, right? Let's look at the horizontal. We have action taking, which is really what we want to be doing out of all of this. But then the other side of that is sense making. And also, I mean, this is making sense out of what is coming into you, but it also has that whole idea of using our senses. And right, we have to detect the things before we can make any sense out of them. On the vertical axis, up at the top, this idea of what are the current mental, physical, emotional states that we are bringing together. And then on the bottom, what are the overarching over time patterns that we may want to break or build or reinforce or restructure. So the internal part, the idea of there's the conscious layer that so many of us get focused on, but there's also that unconscious layer that we really are influencing and working with all of these together in all of those layers of things. Those of you with NLP background, if there's anything from your experiences that you don't see fitting in one of these areas, I would love to have that conversation offline because this is my working model and I really haven't found anything that doesn't fit on this diagram. So would love to have that conversation if you see something. This gives us a way of thinking about the big chunks that go into this. So, right, the state management. Are we talking about our own state? Are we talking about our prospects, our clients? I mean, we've got all of that going on. We've got the sense making. How are we making sense out of the world in general, but specifically the things that our audience is feeding to us? What are the patterns that are going on? And noticing what's happening so that we can decide whether to reinforce or break any of those given patterns with the intention of driving whatever actions are going to, and this is the layer that doesn't always show up in any of these models, but ethically influencing people's actions and making sure that the things that they're doing is in their best interest. So all of those pieces are there for the NLP side of things. I really think that the action taking happens. The other three, we really want to dig in and emphasize. Okay, what's going on in terms of state management for yourself, for other folks? When it comes to remote, how are we doing that differently than we might be doing in person? So, same thing with senses, right? What are we sensing? What are we seeing, hearing? You can't get the tactile sense of touching someone in the remote setting, but are we dialing in our sensory acuity so that the things that are happening in that call, on that remote setting, in the text messages, etc. Are we really detecting what's going on there? So are we seeing and hearing? And let's not disregard the words and thinking about the language patterns that are showing up. So all of these fun layers are going on, and there's a slightly different emphasis in the remote, but each of those is definitely pieces that I'm using online, offline, and we'll dig at the end a little bit into how do we think about some of those pieces and sort in the remote sense rather than on an offline sort of situation that most of us are used to working in. Yay. All right. Next up, productive tension. For those of you who need the review, let's real quick. Productive tension is the quantity of activity in an individual at any given moment in time, mental, physical, emotional, things that are happening. We are able to say from the low levels of activity of we label that apathy. When it's moderate, we call that power. When it's really high, we call that stress. We've also got the hybrid, power stress, power apathy. I love this model because it takes some of that state management aspect from the NLP side of things and gives us a simple model with 5 levels. We can think about 5 different states and not have to worry about all the details that come into doing full state management on the NLP side of things. But it also, because it does have that descriptive, predictive, prescriptive layer to it, it tells us a lot about someone's state if we can just get into one of these 5 areas and say, okay, this person seems to be in power. I can describe what is likely to be happening there, confirm or deny those things, and move on. And we don't necessarily have to think about all of the different dimensions. We can just think about, okay, I want to raise their tension or lower it. So I love productive tension, online, offline. It shows up all over the place. The flavors of what sorts of actions you want to be taking. This is where that action taking component that is there in NLP, I tend to fall back on this model rather than that one. So productive tension. Third, octalysis. Octalysis, what we're looking at here in this diagram are what Yukai Chao has identified as the 8 core drives of humans that he actually extracted from looking at how games have engaged people over the years. Right? Obviously, video games are the one at the moment that people really are focused on. How do you keep people engaged in this video game? But there are people who spend many, many years of their lives digging into chess as a game. We have played hide and seek, where all of these games are part of our lives. When I look at gamification, I'm really looking at it from this motivational side of things, not from a let's turn every experience into a game. And I think that in some ways you kind of missed that boat because he has this spectacularly gamified experience with lots of content that's Octalysis Prime. He's got the island, and I think he missed one of the things that really makes this different from just we're going to throw points, badges, leaderboards at somebody, right? That to me is possibly gamification. Was having a great discussion recently with a friend about, but was this experience that I designed gamification? I said, okay, pause. Just looking at the result, we can't tell. For me, the gamification comes in. Did we do the design with the intention of driving particular outcomes based on the audience that we're really looking at? So having that design component going on in the background, this is why Octalysis is a gamification framework. So let's run through these in the same way that productive tension, we've got the primary states. I tend to think of north, south, east, west on here. So 1, 4, 5, 8 as the core core drives, the primary drives, and then the other 4 are the mixes of those 4. So starting at the top, Core Drive 1 is epic meaning and calling. This is the big, compelling vision of the future that is better and improved and is spectacularly engaging and compelling, but has no urgency whatsoever. The other end of the spectrum, down at Core Drive 8, loss and avoidance, is really urgent. And you need to do something so that you're not going to lose that you're going to avoid stepping in that hole, right? But it doesn't feel very good. So this is where the design component shows up. You say, all right, I know that there's going to be aspects of my experience that are going to have Core Drive 1, Core Drive 8. What if we intentionally pull this idea from the NLP side, build a propulsion system? So we're going to start with some away from, and then we're going to focus heavily on the towards. So we start with just enough loss and avoidance to get people moving. And once they're moving, we get away from that yucky feeling and we emphasize the epic meaning and calling and that compelling big picture of what the future can hold. So we've built a propulsion system that starts us with yuck, but moves us to yum. It starts us with urgent, but moves us to compelling. We can do the same thing on the horizontal axis. We've got the ownership and possession on the left. This is extrinsic motivation, right? We're giving bonuses. We're doing these rewards. The other end of the spectrum is the social influence and relatedness. So this is that intrinsic motivation. We do it for the sake of being with other people. Right? I recently was in a production of Spamalot at a local community theater, and not a single person there was getting paid. We were doing it for that social relatedness, the influence, the intrinsic motivation of being there in the space. I did get to keep my Knights of Knee hat, but other than that, there was no ownership or possession going on in this whole experience. So I tend to think of that axis in the same way. I want to build a propulsion system that starts with just enough ownership to get people engaged there, but as soon as possible, move to that social influence, the intrinsic. So get from the extrinsic to the intrinsic as quickly as possible, which, when we combine those two propulsion systems, means it's pushing us up into that empowerment of creativity and feedback. So that Core Drive 3 in the top right corner is really the thing that we want to be doing almost all the time, right? That's our goal, is to get us to the point where it's like Legos, right? We continue to engage even though there's no particular goal. So we have no accomplishment necessarily showing up there. It's relatively predictable, right? We know what blocks we have. We expect that when we click them together, they're going to do the thing that we expect them to do. The right scarcity, if we have enough, then it's not a problem, right? But we've got that empowerment of feedback creativity that comes from leaning into the white hat Core Drive 1 side of things and into the social influence Core Drive 5 side of things. Trouble is, most of the gamification out there, gamification because I got to do the scare quotes, is really in Core Drive 2, and it's in that mastery and accomplishment side of things, and it's just, I'm gonna be better. So points, badges, leaderboards. Maybe we get some confetti showing across the screen when we did something that they wanted us to do. Yay. But again, if you just throw game techniques at your experience, I don't consider that gamification. It's the design and the thinking through the process in the background that makes that work. We can do all these things offline. We can create experiences that have, right? Notice I don't show the game techniques. I don't want them there because that's not the point. The point is thinking through, are we creating experiences that give people just enough motivation from loss and avoidance and lots of epic meaning and calling? And do we have a little bit of ownership showing up so that they engage a bit at the beginning? But really, are we emphasizing that social influence, the empowerment, the unpredictability and curiosity is even good, but we don't want to stay there, right? So that for me, offline is what it is. online gives us a lot of opportunities with the technology to build in things that do look like games. And I encourage people to think through the process rather than just throwing techniques at it. So this is my third big model here that there's some other components for octalysis. Yes, I did throw the slides in there. Thinking about the phases that we go through in an experience. Just recognizing that there's the discovery phase where people don't really know what's going on, but then they commit and now they're into the onboarding phase and they're learning enough about the system to then move into the scaffolding phase where we're going to do any of the particular activities that are relevant for this experience. So they understand now, okay, these are the actions that happen here. And then they end up in the end game where we're not doing anything new. The novelty's gone. But how do we keep them engaged long term and thinking about, again, getting them up into that corner where they're getting that feedback, that creativity engaged? So, how do we empower that for the end game? In the same way that I use the path of self discovery as the model, I use these four as just thinking about, okay, where are we in the experience? And have I designed something for each of these four phases, or did I forget one? That in and of itself gives me a great piece. But recognizing that, yeah, when people get connected to you, do they go straight from discovery to now we're doing the thing? Do you assume that they know how to do all this stuff and jump straight to the end game? Or did we actually spend some time onboarding people as a new client? Did we spend some time helping them understand the way that we work? And again, remote, offline, online, they all have these aspects to them. Doing some of this remotely, you don't have to be the one doing it every time face to face. You can have some of this set up as, all right, here's the onboarding sequence of steps and videos that people go through. And they're not able to schedule their first session until they've checked the boxes or whatever you decide to do in terms of gating some of that. But for me, thinking through these four phases, going, okay, wait, these are new tasks for this person. Let's think about what that scaffolding experience needs to be like to keep them engaged so that they will get to the point where we're doing the ongoing end game stuff. But we got to work our way over there. And then really thinking, I mean, if I were to spend a lot of time designing any of these four, it's going to be the ones on the end for sure. And typically, the end game gets the least amount of attention, but has the most rewards. If we can keep the people who are that far into the process engaged, then really what it's doing is feeding back to that discovery. They'll tell other people, they will be much more vocal, they'll be more likely to engage further services. So thinking through, yeah, am I designing stuff in the end game or not? Discovery is the place where people would like to do a lot of gamification with the bells and whistles and the fancy things. But how do we do that in a way that is professional and on brand, as opposed to, yay, we're throwing confetti everywhere, but that's not what our audience is really going to respond to. So, great.
This
All
is
right.
really good.
Thank you, Brian. Next step from the octalysis, there's one more piece in octalysis that is spectacular for me to think through from just a framework setting, and it is the strategy dashboard. And let's zoom in on that. The strategy dashboard has these 6 different pieces. 2 of them I kind of don't care about so much in general. The feedback and rewards, they'll show up. We'll get there. For now, the pieces that are super important are, do we know who's playing along with us? Do we know what our audience is like? Do we know what motivates them, going back to the core drives? And then at the other side of the diagram, the win states. What's a win for those people? How do they get what they want out of this experience? Do we know what they want? And not just tangible things, but right, what are the emotional win states what are the emotions they want to be feeling? What are the experiences they want to be having, and how will that feel? What's the flavor of that? And So knowing what that win state is. But then the one above it is our business metrics. So what numbers are we trying to move? Are we trying to increase revenue? Are we trying to extend the length of an engagement? What is it that we're really designing towards for us to consider it a win? If we can get those three things aligned, these people are now going to get these win states, and in the process, they're going to bump these metrics for us. Then we can go look at what actions will make that happen. So yeah, there are feedback mechanisms, there'll be rewards. If I were building this almost in the sense of a business model, I would say, what feedback mechanisms do we have easily available at the moment? What rewards do we already have on deck that we can just immediately roll out? Later on, we'll go do more in-depth design on those, but just initially, can you fill in these 6 boxes? Right? How do we give feedback whether this person is progressing through the system in an appropriate way? Going back to the 4 phases. So this is one of the big pieces that I love out of Octalysis. And again, it's all stuff that's hidden in the background. People don't necessarily know that you've gamified an experience if you've done it well. It's the design, it's the going through these processes and understanding all these pieces to put it into place. So this is model 3. Model 4 is the experiential learning theory and format. This one, we've got 2 different ones layered in here. So the compass rose, north, south, east, west, are from the experiential learning theory, Kolb. He said, all right, if we're going to walk people through this cycle over and over again, we're going to start up north at concrete experience. We're going to move over to reflective observation. So we're going clockwise around this. Then we're going to go to abstract conceptualization. So the top is we're really in our body, the bottom is we're really in our head. Then we're going to move over to active experimentation on the west. And we're going to continue back to concrete experience to close the loop and start the cycle over again. McCarthy was doing her research at about the same time and said, oh, great, we love the experiential learning cycle. What has to happen in between those compass rose points? So as we go from concrete experience to reflective observation, we should be addressing the question why in that learner's mind. As we go from reflective observation into abstract conceptualization, we need to be addressing the question of what in that learner's mind. Abstract conceptualization to active experimentation, we need to address that question of how. How do we do the thing? And then she uses if for the 4th one, but I find where else fits better going from that active experimentation back to the concrete experience. Where else can we apply this skill that we just developed in the how quadrant? If you put things in this order, it not only gives you that rich experience where you've hit all of these different questions, but theoretically there are learner types that go into the quadrants and all sorts of fun things as you progress through this, that you're now hitting all of those people's questions. You're making sure that they're satisfied during this experience. And you've got all of this happening. You're going from, and here's the shortest version of format that I can describe. You're going from people's experiences at the top, right? They come in with some outside real life world that they're coming into, now come down to the classroom. In this context, that classroom is just a pendulum down at the bottom, right? We're in the abstract conceptualization mode almost exclusively. We do lecture and homework. And so we've got this little pendulum swinging back and forth at the bottom. If we can take their concrete experiences that they come into the experience with, connect it down to that classroom experience, do whatever you were going to do in the classroom, and then make sure that you connect it back to their ongoing life, then we have a much richer experience, even without necessarily changing what's going on in the classroom itself. So this one definitely feels more applicable directly for the trainers, for the speakers, because I actually, you may have already caught on that I snuck the why, what, how, where else into the slide deck. Their headings, I was explicit about it because I knew I was bringing this up. I don't always make it as explicit, but are you working your way through all of these? I actually even use it as the starting point for writing any sales copy. I'm thinking, okay, I need to make sure that I answer the question why in their mind immediately. And if they don't resonate with that why, then it's good for them to leave right away. Then we'll talk a little bit about what, and the emphasis on a little bit, right? What's the minimum amount of content all the way around, no matter the context, that I need to help them get to the how. So what's the minimum amount of content for them to go develop this skill? Now we start with tiny little skills, and then we accumulate those to develop more rich skills. And once we've integrated those, then we can go practice some more. And then we can look, okay, where are we performing this? Where else can I go use these skills and demonstrate them and apply them into real life world again? When it's copy, I make sure I hit what, or so why. Then I definitely have a little bit of what, what we're doing. Uh, how does this make a difference in your life? And then what next instead of where else? But that's what I use for copy and everything else. I mean, this shows up constantly. Marketing side of things, we have the same thing going on, right? Are we addressing all four quadrants in our marketing, whether in a given piece or across multiple pieces? See a question from T before I wander off. ELT is the experiential learning theory from David Kolb.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome. And scaffolding. So let me flip back to that slide then. Hello. Too many. Thinking about the four phases, discovery is they're finding out about you. They take an action. They've now signed on, joined something is between discovery and onboarding. Onboarding is, all right, you've now gotten into our system. Let's get you oriented a little bit. Scaffolding is, have they gone through all of the individual actions that they will be doing within our system, within our experience? So do we have that experience that we're designing intentionally for, okay, you're onboarded, you filled out all your paperwork, marvelous. But now, are we delivering training? Are we delivering coaching? Have they gone through the different aspects of what we may be doing when we're coaching? The first coaching session may be heavily meta in terms of saying, here, we're now doing this step in what we're working through this process. So you spend a lot more time in the scaffolding thinking about process and making that explicit and interacting with them in a way that shows them, okay, here's the thing that you're going to have to do, right? Until they've gotten to the point where they've experienced homework or whatever, outside of session tasks that they're doing. You may need to do a different set of experiences. Once they've done it a few times, you're like, okay, now we're in end game. You just need to do it. What I may need to emphasize the engagement aspect of doing that differently than, okay, now the first times through, I have to scaffold, right? When we go to paint on the walls, which we're doing at the building, right? You set up the scaffolding so you can reach further than you could without it. The idea there is they're not necessarily able to do the individual tasks yet. So you make sure that you're supporting them extra. Now we've done all the tasks. I'm going to reduce the support until, okay, now we're at the end game. You know how to do these things. Go do them. And it's a different emphasis on what we're motivating in any one of those phases. Did that help?
Yes, it seems as though the scaffolding and in-game go back and forth a lot.
Potentially, yeah. If there are new activities showing up, I would definitely lean back into scaffolding. Right? If we've changed modes, if there's a new type of activity happening, yeah, I'm gonna mentally go back to, okay, I need to go into a scaffolding mode for this. What are they gonna need to learn how to do this separate from end game of do it?
Yeah, I use format a lot. I use it in everything. And but I had never heard of ELT. And I like the discussion around scaffolding and getting people to understand why onboarding, and I like the discovery, that those words in
Yeah.
onboarding. And I like scaffolding because it's a tiered thing. It's building up, it's helping you to reach beyond. But you need to have the foundation of discovery and onboarding.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And some people resonate better with designing a discovery phase than with the term marketing.
Yeah.
They're likely to overlap heavily.
Yeah, I don't want to use that word for this one client, but I like that. I like those words.
Yeah.
Yeah, Wayne, is there a I remember you and I talked about accomplices before, and I'm still on their email list, but is there a book?
There is a book. It is Actionable Gamification by Yukai Chao.
Yeah, Yukai. Okay,
Yep.
that's right. Because what I like, what you put together here, like it just had a meeting. We're talking about human-centered perspective in healthcare and human-centered design. And I'm a partner at Giving Back Studio that teaches healthcare and health tech companies how to design this. And we're looking at things like prevention as a service kind of models, right? And so if you think about the codependency in the current healthcare system, like even the research showed, like when Fitbit came out from a consumer health perspective, people knew how to count their steps, but they don't know what to do with that information. There's no scaffolding there,
Yeah.
so they never get the
Yep.
benefits of that.
Yep.
So this is pretty powerful stuff here.
Yeah. And this is why I say these are my 4 core models that I come back to all the time. There are other ones that cycle in and out, but these 4 I just rely on heavily. So how do these things apply? We snuck some of that in there, but thinking about the human development side of things, we've got that delivery piece, right? We're delivering our coaching, consulting, speaking, training, whatever it is that we're doing. But then we also, if we're not embedded in another organization and we're actually having human development business, we have some other components that show up. And tell me how this resonates in terms of sizes of these, because that's a fun question for this audience. Someone once said, "Oh, hey, I spend, every hour I spend coaching, I spend an hour in a sales call." And that was their numbers, ICT's query. So I said to my students and coaching, I'm like, all right, guys, think about this. It may not be the right ratio, but think about this in terms of this is at least as important as delivering it. And in this case, one of these is actually a revenue generating activity, and one of them is a revenue consuming activity. Be aware. So we've got, and I have my students build these skills backwards. I'm like, there's no point in getting really good at sales until you have something to deliver. So everyone here has something to deliver. I'm not worried about that. Most, if not all of you, have gone through master streams. You've got the sales piece fairly well solid. Same sort of thing happened with the ratios between these 2 together, and then the marketing piece. We got to generate some inquiries, and some of the people, and this resonates ratio, at least idea wise. Yeah, I'm probably spending twice as much time marketing as I am in sales calls, if not more. So, right, it's the question of how do we think about these different activities that are going on, and how do each of those models apply into this? Well, before we wander off, let's at least tie these together with something that most of us don't want to do a whole lot of, but has to be there. It's the mortar that goes in between these nice tiles. The administration, the administrivia in the background, that, right, all the paperwork has to be done fine, but I don't want to do it as much as possible. So ideally we'll automate it, but the rest of it are really human focused skills, right? The delivery, the sales, the marketing are all us interacting with other humans. So all 4 of those models can now apply into each of those activities. So if we look at NLP as an advanced communication model, and if that's all we think about it as, how applicable do you think it is to marketing? How much communication are you doing in your marketing? Quite likely a lot, right? Sales. How much
Mhm.
communication are we doing in sales? huh, okay. How much communication are we doing when we deliver those services? If the bulk of each of those isn't some form of communication, I really want to know what you're doing. I'm curious what's happening if you're not really digging into that communication side of things. So, what are the mental, physical, emotional states that we want to induce in ourselves to go do these activities? What are the mental, physical, emotional states that we want our prospects and our clients to have at any given moment? Are we thinking about that? Are we even just looking at the 5 levels of productive tension and going, okay, I know that the goal for marketing is to get them up into power stress. We need them to hit that threshold of activation to say, yeah, I'm interested. Let's talk. But where do they come in? And if they come in at stress versus apathy, you've got a whole different set of experiences that you need to be focused on from that marketing perspective. So that's same idea with the sales. You know, the master stream takes care of that. We know it doesn't matter where they come in. We're going to push them down to edge of apathy and then continue with the rest of what we're doing. When you are delivering your services, what states are your audience, your clients in when they show up versus where you're going to take them? One of my experiences from the first NLP trainers training that I did, they put everybody on stage and we all had to give a little presentation. And I thought, this is no problem, no big deal. I got up there and freaked out in a way that I hadn't for years. And it was only later that I went, oh, those sneaky SOBs. They induced fear of public speaking in every one of us so that we would all start from the same place and they could then work with us as a group. I'm like, you guys, what in the world? So, while you may not want to go to that extreme, what do you need to do in terms of calibrating? Okay, these people are coming in at this stage. How do I get them from here to the next? Right? They came in with this state. Right? Marketing especially. How do we drive the tension up? Maybe we want to start with the people who are at power and shopping and just push them into power stress. Rather than let's start our marketing at people who are in apathy, don't even know that they've got a problem, have no interest in changing. That's a whole different set of marketing materials we're building there. But having that in mind, we can really think about those arcs of, okay, at some point, we're going to have these people coming in at those levels. Do I want to focus on them yet? Do I want to focus on them ever? Right? I don't necessarily, when I'm teaching NLP, want to go for those folks who have zero background and have never heard about NLP. I don't want to start them from the ground zero. I want the people who at least have an idea and are saying, yeah, I want to go deep on this. Cool. So all of that is just the north part of the NLP model. Thinking about the senses. And again, this all applies remote or not, right? Are we doing the communication? Are we using our senses? Are we actually paying attention to the patterns in what's going on? Are we designing patterns for people to follow? Or are we unintentionally putting them into patterns that we don't really want them to be doing? So again, we'll come back to the productive tension because we all have that as a baseline common language. I noticed it first in the idea from productive tension and came up with this NSA model. Notice, stop, maybe add. So notice what level of productive tension someone's at and what your activities are doing to their tension. If you're doing downgrade activities when you really need for their tension to be going up, notice that, stop it. Stop doing the things that push your tension down. And then maybe add something else. But often just getting your foot off the brake is enough. So same thing on the NLP side. With the language patterns, notice what you're doing. When you know a language pattern, it's worth spending some time and thinking, okay, how does this language pattern show up in my life right now? I have 3 favorite language patterns that get people in the door. You, try, but. You is really focusing on which referential index are we using? Am I talking about you Am I talking about me? Am I talking about us? And am I doing that on purpose? So this is one where, from the NLP side, the idea of installing whatever. And the example is when somebody's starting to in on a rant about, don't you hate it when you get cut off in traffic? And me hearing it go, no, I don't. Please stop trying to install that in me. So when you find yourself in traffic, you can be calm and collected and go on about your day. So the language pattern there is noticing where we're putting things. If there's something that happens to be negative, I'm either going to own it myself or I'm going to put it out on the collective they. I will not put it on the individual that I'm talking to. When it's positive stuff, I'm 100% going to give it to them. So when you feel joy, when you think about learning, yeah, you can have that. That's a gift. You're welcome. So those sorts of things that we can do with language patterns. I mean, that's just one of the top 3 that gives us this idea of, here's a sample, right? If you can start noticing, where are you using what referential index? Then you can start thinking about, is that how I really want to be using that? Huh, maybe not. So then you can make some changes. You can stop installing things in other people. You may also stop talking about certain aspects because it's not helpful in the conversation, right? You may have had a horrible day in traffic, but that doesn't mean that you bring it into your coaching conversation or sales conversation, even worse, or right, unless that's a point of rapport that you want to build with that individual. Hey, how was traffic? Oh yeah, I hate it when it happens. Okay, great. We just normalized it and pushed it down. So fun stuff on that front. Productive tension, we've talked about in all these contexts, I think, right? If you're not applying MasterStream for sales, then please talk to somebody, right? I'm certified. T'll do it, right? We have people here who will get you through the MasterStream side of things. If you're not using at least the big picture ideas, please do this. The delivery, chances are good that most of you are using productive tension, change grid in your delivery in some fashion. Fun question as always, are there places where I'm not using it that I should be? Are there places where I'm using it because it's easy that maybe that's not the right place, right? But it's the same thing. Notice, stop, maybe add something, right? Yay. Marketing. This is one where I don't know how much the community does on the marketing side, thinking through in productive tension terms. If you're not, this is a spectacular place to come back and say, okay, am I raising tension in these materials? Am I doing too many downgrade maneuvers for this? Oh, interesting. So, fun stuff. Octalysis, we talked a lot about doing this throughout all of these pieces, but even just thinking about who is my audience, how are they motivated? Which of these core drives are they likely to want to be present in an experience for them? Then we can also do our propulsion systems. But what do they want to be there? Fine, we'll just make sure those ones that they would like to see are emphasized and made very conscious so that they'll get engaged and stay engaged. Sales. I'm going to go back to to MasterStream. I'm never going to think Octalysis, but there is still that layer of which phase are we in? Oh, if they haven't actually purchased yet, they're still in discovery phase. But once they're purchased, then we come back to, all right, so if anything, sales lives in that gap between discovery and onboard. Yay. When you're delivering the experiences, are you using the propulsion systems? Are you thinking about the phases? Are you tailoring the experiences to the person in front of you? How are they motivated? Which of those 8 do they come back to as home base? Let's start there, but not necessarily stay there. Format. we talked through some of that. I mean, I use it in marketing materials. We see it to a degree in the sales. I'm going to go back to MasterStream, but it does show up to some degree there. Delivery, the training side, 100%. I go back to that as the default, right? I'm going to organize my thoughts in this way to be well received, to go through the whole cycle. I put all 4 of these together and have really leaned into the instructional design and learning experience design side of things. And I'm like, oh, look, format is even too big of a chunk. Let's break it down into several phases of, okay, let's focus on what are let's do the brain dump on content. Yay. But that's a level 0 type experience. I don't expect that to be the final thing. Let's think about, okay, if we're really going to design it, what are the skills that they need to have at the end of this? How do we break those skills down into smaller and smaller skills until we have just the individual component skills that they need to practice, and then accumulate back up to that mega skill that we're going to walk out the door with? Yay. Then we can look at, oh, who is even involved here, right? What are they coming with experience-wise? Let's now tailor that to their needs. And that's a whole separate layer than what skills would they need. The skills are independent of who shows up. How they arrive and who it is that's in the room, then we can tailor some things in a whole different way. Oh, wow, golly, bumping buttons. And then the next layer really starting to get into what are the individual activities that need to go into those. Okay, I know who's in the room. I know what skills they need to walk out with. How am I really going to dig in and make that happen? So that's my ongoing project, is to integrate all of these, kind of that merging of brilliance into how do we go about designing learning experiences rather than just showing up and learning something on our own. And we had that chat not so long ago in one of these calls. So these are the models, and some of these are very clearly applying into the remote stuff, right? Some of it is applicable across everything. But I realized that part of the reason that the remote version of things has gone as well as it has is because I have those foundations. I've done the design in the background. Mm-hmm. So especially the octalysis, the format side of things, that happens in the background and people don't see it unless I'm blatant and say, where else can we now apply these things? Right. And so in this case, right, if we're going to continue the conversation, I am having a remote ready virtual event November 12th and 13th. We'll be doing that over the weekend. So if you guys want to join us, I'm happy to get you that information. If you really want to dig in on the gamification from Yukai's perspective, he has Octalysis Prime. Again, I'm happy to send you a link if you don't want to Google it, or if you want to be my buddy on the island, because he really has leaned into that. Let's make it a game. And I think that there's a lot more to be done when it's not actually a game. And feel free to reach out. This is my contact info if you don't have it already.
Excellent, excellent. So let's open it up to questions. Anyone have any questions you want to throw to Wayne? A moment, Brian, you're unmuted.
What's I know we talked about this before as well. A basic, like a beginner's NLP languaging, like that I can introduce to some of these health tech entrepreneurs, that just to get the taste of it.
Mm-hmm. So at the moment, I could not point you to something to say, here's a good taster. I have a couple of things that I probably just need to make more publicly available. So I've got some materials. Reach out. We'll make sure that happens, and then we'll make sure whoever else wants to see it can get access to that stuff too. Mm-hmm. But if you want to go see what I'm building out, innerspaceacademy.com is the place you can go check things out.
Okay, so it's Inner Space?
Inner Space Academy. Yes, we're building out the idea of rather than going to space camp to go into outer space, we're going to go take on all these models and go into the inner space side of things.
Yes,
but Inner Space Academy.
Shrunk down into a ship, traveled so much more.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Movie about that. One thing I'd like to throw into the conversation here is that two of these three models, other than obviously than the change grid, actually overlay on the change grid. And as you were describing them, I was going like, okay, we'll need to rotate that. That one needs a mirror flip.
Yes. Yeah.
And the reason why I found that kind of intriguing is because what it's actually doing is saying that in order for you to work your way around one of these models, using this model as a bit of a cycle in development, that means there is a, I don't want to say standard, but there is a certain method of moving someone from one to the next, and then from that one to the next one, that one to the next one. So there is a way that we move that around. Well, that way ends up taking the form of variations on change grid maneuvers. So we're going to tell them what they've come into us with. What was they had an experience they were having right then and there. I think that's at the top.
Concrete experience.
Oh, yeah, there's a concrete experience. X is happening. And so now there's got to be some processing around that. Do they need to learn more in order to handle X? Do they need to relook at X to figure out if their perception of X is even accurate? There's change grid maneuvers afoot that's going on there. So I thought it could be very interesting at some point just to take another look at Wayne's models here and say, well, does it overlay? How does it overlay? Does it cover the whole thing wall to wall? Is it focusing in on a little bit of a section of it instead? And certainly I felt that same thing with octalysis. So I think that that's going to need a more thoughtful rotation to overlay. And I do think it needs to be mirror flipped in over to overlay. But that last model, the format, and what was the other part of it?
Experiential learning theory.
Yeah, experiential learning theory. I think that now maps very nicely to the master process. And as you were talking about the 4 different phases, I'll just call them that for now. I went like, well, that's definitely kind of like a phase 2 discovery kind of an element. And then I loved when you said, don't explain too much. Don't give away too much information. What you've just said there is that giving information is a downgrade maneuver. So you got to do enough so they feel as though you can help them with whatever their situation is, and then you got to move on. Time to get some decisions happening. And so as you were describing that and what the outcome actually is, and then cycling back to, I went like, that actually could very well overlay on the change grid itself. But as you speak it, it resonates very much with the master stream process. So, I always know if I can look at a model and go like, well, it resonates with things where I have in place, it's by definition brilliant. so there we go. But it might be interesting for everyone for us to take a little bit more of a dive into these models and say, can you guys see it overlaying? Does it at least feel like it overlays? And if so, how? Now, ultimately, that's a very interesting academic kind of an experience, or a different kind of a puzzle, a game in and of itself, if you will. But turning this into something that is actually enhancing your practical approach to how you go about bringing yourself clients, securing those clients, working with those clients, and expanding upon them. That's where I think you really need to go to a deeper understanding of the science, the psychology behind each one of these models. And I'm sure that these models all lend themselves to procedures to be followed, techniques to be employed, methodologies, but that's going to take a deeper dive, more work to be learning there. But on the surface, resonates very nicely. I can feel the rotations. I can feel the sequencing. Yeah.
Yes, years ago when I did the format trainers training, I immediately, when I was introduced to the model, I'm like, oh, this maps to the change grid, done. Like I didn't even, I flipped it, just went, oh, these quadrants go there, done.
Yeah. And see, that's when we're just talking about the 4 elements that make it format. Yeah, but when you get into that adult learning kind of thing, or what you experiential learning, it goes like that. Those words all by themselves imply that a timeline is in action. Well, the moment a timeline is in action, we're talking about how tension is going to change over the course of an event, a situation, time. over the course of time. And so that's why we like, that overlays on the change grid or on the master stream. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I actually, except for the final phase, I think that it maps beautifully.
I
I
think it
don't
does,
think in an educational setting I want to drop them down to power apathy. Other
I
than
would
that,
agree. I would agree. I think that when we're looking at most influence models, they tend to touch upon phases 2, 3, and 4. So the discovery, the recommendations being given, the commitment coming into play, that tends to be where they do. But you got to have this upfront piece that I think most people just assume is happening. This connection is happening between you and whoever the prospect is or the client is, as the case may be. So there's an assumption going on that I said, don't just assume that away. There's work to be done in that in order to set up your ability to do the discovery work that needs to be done. And obviously, got to get them to relax enough to be open and honest and participative, et cetera. So we got to lower their level of tension. And then at the end of things, it's just kind of like, well, the question, where do you want to leave them at the end of phase 5 is entirely dictated by, well, where are you at in the big overall delivery scheme? So for example, if I've recommended a solution, they've committed to that solution that I can immediately implement, I may say, I don't need to lower their tension all the way down to power apathy because I'm here in the moment. I'm going to keep it up high enough to get the work done, get the implementation, get the delivery fulfilled, whatever. And then maybe, just maybe, I'm moving on to the next sale with that individual. Where do we go next? Now, how do we build upon that? As opposed to a sale where there's going to be an interruption in the communication where you want to move them down. And so if the approach, the methodology doesn't give some thought at the very least to this idea about where do I need to leave them in order to best situate things for when we do whatever we're doing next. I think that's a really important thing. Otherwise, you spend a lot of time having to rebuild tension that you might have been able to avoid. Yeah.
And see, I think that's what the big thing for me is, that the four of them together, the tension management perspective to me adds the human element to it, right? So think about the experiential learning theory where concrete experience, right? From a healthcare perspective, a patient comes to the experience or comes to a physician with some experience of whatever that diagnosis is. That's never honored, right? So we're not even really trained to meet them from that perspective. So the end game becomes codependency because now they leave with not relevant information. They have too much, but it's not relevant to their daily activity. So if you reverse that, now you have a whole different experience that we're supposed to call patient centricity, but they need to get rid of that idea. In my opinion, that's what I'm telling them. You need to think about more human-centered perspective. And I think these kinds of models would at least shape that, what that looks like. Because I was trained in informatics. It always starts with a stakeholder experience. I don't see that in any design in healthcare systems today with what the patient goes through.
Right.
You have to start there, not, leave that as some, kind of haphazard experience. And so I think that's the difference. So this is game changer to me.
And Brian, I would agree with you on that, and that's why I put the comment in the chat about the ELT, because in my work of diversity, oftentimes folks cannot relate to one's experience because it's not theirs. And trying to get people, trying to raise one's awareness and consciousness around what people are experiencing and whether or not in an environment there is a sense of belonging. The ELT approach is very effective at times of making that connection for folks and helping people understand what a colleague may be experiencing in the environment. So thank you, Wayne, for sharing that. And it was great to see that you lean on that as well.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Okay, so we're up at the top of the hour. So anyone have any final comments, questions you'd like to throw towards Wayne?
I just want to thank Wayne for his input and presentation today, because I think this has been a great blueprint for how to communicate and coordinate action of others, and that's key for me. So thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Chris. Okay, so with that then, we'll say thank you all very much for attending. We will put the recording up on YouTube as usual. So share it, share it, share it, share it near, share it wide, and do reach out to Wayne to get any further information you'd like to have about his Remote Ready event. Okay, so thanks everybody. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.